What would you do if your neighborhood declared war on birds? This is the unbelievable story of how a simple hobby, feeding songbirds, turned into a full-blown war between one stubborn homeowner and the most tyrannical HOA in town. It began with a ban. It ended with chaos. And in between, there were feathers, fury, and a fight no one could forget. This is the bird feeder war. Evelyn Ross loved her mornings quiet. Her house, tucked neatly into a row of identical beige homes in Maplewood Estates, was supposed to be a sanctuary. But more than anything, Evelyn loved the birds. Every morning, she would brew her coffee, step out onto her porch, and listen. The goldfinches, the sparrows, the cardinals, they greeted her with their songs. She had names for some of them, favorites that returned year after year. So naturally, she hung bird feeders. Nothing extravagant, just 2 wooden feeders and 1 hummingbird nectar tube. For Evelyn, they were small acts of joy. For the birds, a lifeline. But for the HOA, they were the beginning of war. It arrived on a Tuesday. A crisp white envelope tucked under Evelyn's doormat. The letterhead read, Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association. She unfolded it, expecting a routine notice. Instead, her stomach dropped as she read aloud. Dear Mrs. Ross, it has come to our attention that you are in violation of Community Policy 14B. No bird feeders shall be placed outdoors, as they may attract pests and disrupt neighborhood cleanliness. You are hereby ordered to remove said feeders within 7 days or face fines of $100 per day until compliance. Evelyn's hands trembled. A ban on bird feeders? Who bans bird feeders? She reread the letter, disbelief turning to indignation. The birds were harmless, beautiful, and certainly less disruptive than the neighbor's barking dogs or the HOA president's weekly lawnmower symphony. No, Evelyn wasn't taking down her feeders. Not without a fight. Richard Halstead, HOA president, was a man who loved control more than life itself. His yard was flawless. His hedges trimmed to mathematical perfection. His garage spotless. His car waxed to a mirror shine. He lived for order and despised anything that didn't fit his picture of perfection. And Richard Halstead hated birds. To him, they were noisy, messy, unpredictable, and nothing represented rebellion more clearly than Evelyn's feeders. When she refused to remove them after the first notice, Richard paid her a personal visit. He stood on her porch, arms crossed, his voice sharp as glass. Mrs. Ross, perhaps you did not understand. The feeders must go. The rules are clear. Evelyn stood her ground. The birds aren't hurting anyone. Richard's smile was thin, forced. Rules are rules. You signed a covenant when you moved here. If you want birds, visit the park. Evelyn's jaw tightened. This is my home. And if I want to hear birds outside my window, then I will. That was the moment the war truly began. The fines came swiftly. $100 per day. $700 by the end of the first week. $1,400 the next. Evelyn ignored them. Neighbors whispered. Some shook their heads, warning her to just give in. Others admired her stubbornness, but kept their distance. After all, crossing Halstead was dangerous. Still, Evelyn refused a break. Instead, she hatched a plan. If she couldn't feed the birds with feeders, she would feed them another way. Evelyn transformed her yard. She tore up bland turf and replaced it with wildflowers, coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, milkweed. She planted berry bushes, serviceberries, elderberries, dogwood. She added nectar-rich blooms for hummingbirds, seed-heavy grasses for sparrows. Her yard became a buffet for every bird in the county. At first, only a few came. A cardinal, a sparrow, a hummingbird. But soon, word spread in the avian world. Dozens arrived, then hundreds. Her yard was alive with wings and song, a living rebellion against the sterile sameness of Maplewood Estates. And Richard Halstead noticed. By midsummer, Evelyn's yard was the brightest spot in the neighborhood, but the HOA saw it differently. They called it a breeding ground for pests. They accused her of disturbing the visual harmony. They even claimed the birds were terrorizing children. Halstead stormed into board meetings, waving photographs of Evelyn's yard like evidence in a trial. "This," he thundered, "is what happens when you let one person ignore the rules. Anarchy." The board murmured, uneasy. But Evelyn's neighbors were no longer so silent. Some quietly admired her defiance. Others began planting their own flowers, hoping to catch a fraction of her bird song. And that was when Halstead realized, if he didn't crush Evelyn soon, he would lose control of the entire neighborhood. One evening, Evelyn stepped onto her porch, coffee in hand, listening to the chorus of birds. But something was different. The trees seemed too quiet, the air heavy. She looked up just in time to see a shadow moving, a drone hovering above her yard, recording every detail. Her phone buzzed with a new email from the HOA. "Mrs. Ross, you are in violation of multiple bylaws. Enforcement action is imminent." Evelyn's heart raced. The war wasn't just about birds anymore. It was about control. And she had just declared open defiance. The drone hovered like a silent predator, its camera glinting in the setting sun. Evelyn felt her blood boil. The HOA was spying on her. The next morning, another letter arrived. This one was thicker, heavier. Inside was a list: violations, fines, warnings, each one harsher than the last. Unauthorized landscaping, unsanctioned wildlife feeding, disturbing neighborhood order. The total, nearly $5,000 in fines. Evelyn slammed the letter down on her table. "Let them try," she muttered. "I am not paying a dime." But in the quiet of her kitchen, she felt the weight of what she was up against. Richard Halstead had money, lawyers, power. She had flowers and birds. Still, she smiled. And that's enough. At first, her neighbors had stayed silent, afraid of the HOA's wrath. But now, the war was visible from every window. Children pointed in awe at the flocks of finches and blue jays that swarmed Evelyn's yard. Older residents whispered complaints about droppings on sidewalks, about cars streaked with white. One afternoon, Evelyn caught her neighbor, Mrs. Carter, glaring across the fence. "You're ruining this neighborhood," Mrs. Carter snapped. "The HOA is right. You brought chaos." Evelyn folded her arms. "Chaos? Or life? Look around you. This place was a graveyard before. Now it sings." Mrs. Carter's lips pressed in, her face flushed. "You'll regret this." But later that evening, a younger neighbor, Tom from 3 houses down, knocked on Evelyn's door. "I just wanted to say," he whispered, glancing nervously up and down the street, "I think it's beautiful what you've done. My daughter loves watching the birds. Don't give up." Evelyn's resolve hardened. She wasn't alone anymore. Halstead was furious. He sat in his immaculate office, HOA documents stacked neatly on his polished desk. Yet every day, his phone buzzed with complaints about Evelyn Ross. It wasn't just the birds anymore. People were starting to resist. Some refused to pay fines. Others asked uncomfortable questions at board meetings. Halstead saw it clearly. Evelyn was a cancer, and cancers must be cut out. He drafted a new motion, an emergency rule expansion. No wildlife-attracting vegetation permitted within Maplewood Estates. Any violators would face daily fines and potential foreclosure. It passed with a narrow majority. The next morning, Evelyn found a bright orange notice staked in her yard. "Remove all vegetation attracting wildlife immediately. Final warning." She crumpled the notice in her fist. "Over my dead body." If Halstead wanted war, Evelyn would give him one. She doubled her efforts. More flowers, more berry bushes, more native grasses. Her yard became a sanctuary, not just for birds, but for butterflies, bees, and squirrels. By midsummer, it was impossible to ignore. Hundreds of birds swirled in the sky above Maplewood Estates, their songs filling every corner. Some residents loved it. Others cursed under their breath as flocks darkened the skies, scattering droppings across pristine driveways. But to Evelyn, it was glorious. Every chirp was defiance. Every wing beat, rebellion. And she began to notice something strange. The birds seemed loyal. When Halstead passed by, they grew louder, shriller, almost hostile. When neighbors muttered insults, the birds swooped closer. It was as if the birds themselves had joined her side. The next community meeting was chaos. Halstead slammed his gavel. Order! Order, I say. Dozens of residents filled the room, their voices clashing like storm winds. She's turned the neighborhood into a bird sanctuary. My kids love it. Leave her alone. The droppings are ruining my car. At least it feels alive around here now. Evelyn stood in the back, arms crossed, listening. For the first time, Halstead's control was slipping. When he finally called for her to speak, Evelyn's voice was calm but firm. You say I am breaking rules. But what rules are worth living under if they choke the very life out of this place? You find me for flowers, for bushes, for joy. But maybe the real pests aren't the birds. Maybe it's the people who think they can control everything. Gasps echoed. Someone clapped. Then another. Halstead's face turned crimson. You're finished, Mrs. Ross, he hissed. Mark my words. Evelyn smiled faintly. We'll see. That night, Evelyn was jolted awake by a strange noise. Outside, her garden rustled. She peered through the window and saw shadows moving. Men, pulling up plants, hacking at bushes, tearing her sanctuary apart. She burst outside, shouting, but they fled into the darkness. In their wake, flowers lay shredded, berry bushes ripped from the soil. Her heart sank, but then she heard it. The birds, dozens of them, screaming in the night, circling, swooping, chasing the men into the street. Their cries were furious, wild, protective. Evelyn stood among the ruins of her garden, tears in her eyes, as the birds roared above her. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was theirs, too. By morning, the destruction was clear. Her yard looked like a battlefield. The HOA had escalated from fines to sabotage. But Evelyn wasn't broken. She replanted. She rebuilt. And as the sun rose, flocks descended once more, louder and larger than ever before. The war was no longer just between Evelyn Ross and Richard Halstead. It was Evelyn and an army of wings, against an empire of control. The summons arrived on a gray Monday morning. Evelyn opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside, thick legal documents spelled out clearly. The Maplewood Homeowners Association versus Evelyn Ross. The charges were absurd. Public nuisance. Endangerment of property. Violation of community safety ordinances. At the bottom, a demand, $75,000 in damages. Her knees buckled. This was no longer a petty squabble. Halstead was trying to bankrupt her, to take her home, to erase her. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the papers as the chirping outside swelled louder, almost as though the birds sensed her despair. She whispered, "They're really going to destroy me." But in the branches above her window, dozens of eyes glittered back, watching, waiting. 2 weeks later, a strange thing happened. A local blogger got wind of the story, then a small-town newspaper. Soon after, Evelyn's war with the HOA was everywhere. Woman sued for attracting birds. HOA declares war on nature. Suburb divided over backyard sanctuary. News vans appeared outside Maplewood Estates. Strangers slowed their cars to glimpse the infamous yard. Reporters stuck microphones in Evelyn's face, asking if she really commanded a bird army. Evelyn chuckled bitterly. I don't command them. They just come. Maybe they know something the HOA doesn't. Halstead raged. He called press conferences, sneering about irresponsible residents and hysterical exaggerations. But the more he spoke, the more arrogant he seemed, and the more the public sided with Evelyn. It started subtly. At first, the birds were simply present. Flocks of sparrows, robins, finches. But then things shifted. One morning, Halstead marched down the sidewalk toward Evelyn's home, HOA documents in hand. Suddenly, a crow swooped low, grazing his head. He flinched, cursed, and stumbled back. Another day, Mrs. Carter muttered insults under her breath while walking past. Within seconds, a chorus of shrill cries echoed overhead, forcing her to cover her ears. It was no longer coincidence. The birds weren't just visiting Evelyn's garden. They were defending it. And Evelyn couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that somehow they were defending her. The courtroom was packed. Halstead arrived in a crisp gray suit, his smug smile radiating confidence. Evelyn, wearing her plain floral dress, felt painfully outmatched. The HOA's lawyer painted her as a menace, a woman who had weaponized wildlife and brought chaos upon Maplewood Estates. When Evelyn was called to the stand, she spoke with trembling honesty. I planted flowers. I grew berry bushes. I didn't feed birds with seed. I fed them with life. And if that's a crime, then maybe the crime isn't mine. As murmurs rippled through the crowd, something remarkable happened. Through the tall windows of the courthouse, faint chirps could be heard. Then louder, louder still, until the entire courtroom was filled with the sound of wings beating against the glass. Hundreds, no, thousands, of birds swarming outside, as if they had followed Evelyn. People gasped. The judge pounded his gavel. Order, order. But no one could ignore it. The birds were there. For her. The court delayed its decision. That night, a thunderstorm rolled in, shaking the town. Evelyn stood at her window, watching lightning split the sky. The storm winds howled. But beneath it, another sound grew. Wings. The birds didn't flee the storm. They gathered. Hundreds perched on her roof, on the trees, on power lines. Their silhouettes looked like an army waiting for her command. And in the distance, Evelyn saw him. Halstead, standing in the rain at the edge of her yard, staring up at the swirling mass of wings with a face pale as bone. The storm raged. The birds screamed. Evelyn whispered into the glass. You started this war, Richard, but you don't control how it ends. The next day, Halstead tried his final move. Under cover of dawn, workers sent by the HOA sprayed Evelyn's yard with chemicals, meant to kill her plants once and for all. But within hours, something went horribly wrong. The chemicals seeped into storm drains, spreading through the neighborhood. Grass withered, flowers browned. Even the pristine lawns of the HOA board members turned sickly yellow. Neighbors were outraged, not at Evelyn, but at the HOA. And through it all, Evelyn's yard stood untouched. The flowers bloomed, the bushes thrived, and the birds kept coming louder and fiercer than ever. It was as though nature itself had chosen a side. Cliffhanger for Act 3. By midsummer, Maplewood Estates was unrecognizable. Perfect lawns turned brown, windows cracked under relentless bird strikes, and the once pristine neighborhood buzzed with chaos. But Evelyn's home? It was an oasis. She sat on her porch, listening to the thunder of wings above, and she realized with a chill this war had grown beyond her. It wasn't just about bird feeders or even the HOA anymore. Something far older, far wilder had been awakened, and it wasn't going back to sleep. Richard Halstead was unraveling. His suit, once immaculate, hung wrinkled on his frame. His hair, once slicked, now fell wild across his forehead. He had not slept in days. He pounded the table at the emergency HOA meeting. She's destroying everything, he barked. We're losing control. Do you not see it? If we let her win, every rule crumbles. Every shred of order vanishes. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Fines hadn't worked. Lawsuits had failed. The sabotage had backfired. What do you suggest? One finally asked. Halstead's eyes glinted with desperation. We burn it out. Tonight. A silence fell. Someone muttered, That's illegal. But Halstead's smile was cold. So is harboring a plague of birds. We call eradication. No one will dare oppose us after this. Evelyn woke to the faint crackle of fire. She rushed to the window and froze. Flames licked across her fence line, spreading toward her berry bushes. Shadows of men moved in the smoke, carrying torches, setting fire to everything they touched. Her sanctuary was burning, heart pounding. She burst outside with garden hose, but the flames roared too quickly, leaping from plant to plant. Smoke clawed at her lungs. Halstead's voice cut through the chaos. This ends now, Evelyn. She spun and saw him at the edge of the yard, torch in hand, his face twisted with fury. You brought this on yourself, he spat. But before he could strike again, the night erupted. The sound began as a hum, then a roar, then a deafening, thunderous scream. The sky above blackened, not with storm clouds, but with wings. Thousands of birds, a living shadow, descended. They dived in swarms, tearing torches from hands, striking faces, clawing at clothes. Men shrieked and fled as the onslaught intensified. Halstead swung his torch wildly, but the birds closed in, crows, jays, sparrows, even tiny finches, all diving, pecking, screeching with an almost human rage. The torch slipped from his hand, hitting the ground with a hiss, and then he fell, face down in the dirt, screaming as wings buried him beneath their fury. Evelyn staggered back, choking on smoke, eyes wide. She had never seen anything so terrifying, so magnificent. The birds weren't protecting the garden anymore. They were delivering judgment. By dawn, the fire was gone. The yard was blackened at its edges, but miraculously, the heart of Evelyn's sanctuary remained untouched. Flowers still vibrant, berry bushes heavy with fruit, as though nature itself had spared them. But Richard Halstead was gone. No one saw him leave. No body was found. His home sat empty, paper still scattered across his desk. Some whispered he had fled town in shame. Others swore they still heard his screams in the night, carried on the wind like a warning. The HOA crumbled within weeks. Members resigned. Meetings stopped. Fines vanished. And Evelyn's home? It became something else. Not just a house. Not just a garden. But a sanctuary. Neighbors who once sneered now left offerings, seed, bread, fresh water bowls, at the edge of her lawn. Children played under the trees, pointing at the birds swirling above like guardians. And Evelyn? She simply sat on her porch, rocking gently, smiling faintly as the flocks gathered. One autumn evening, months after the fire, Evelyn walked her garden as the sun bled red across the horizon. The air was alive with wings, but her eyes fell on a single crow perched on a fence. It stared at her, unblinking. In its beak, it held a scrap of paper. She reached out, heart pounding, and took it gently. Her breath caught. It was a fragment of an HOA notice. Her name at the top, the faded words, "Final warning," still legible. The crow tilted its head, as if studying her, then released a sharp cry before taking flight. Above, the entire flock stirred, swirling into a vast, shifting formation. For a fleeting second, Evelyn saw it, the unmistakable outline of a man's face, twisted in rage, staring down at her from the shape of wings. Then it scattered, dissolving into the twilight sky. Evelyn stood frozen, the paper clutched in her hand, a chill racing down her spine. The war was over, but some battles never truly end. And so, the story of Maplewood Estates became legend, of the woman who planted flowers and sparked a war, of the birds who rose against tyranny, and of the man who vanished, leaving behind only whispers carried on wind. They still call it the Bird Feeder War. And if you ever walk Maplewood's quiet streets, you might look up and wonder if the shadows above are just birds, or if something far older still watches.